Hey everyone, welcome to Our Small Footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. Today's video is number 4 in the sort of May-June series of food prep, planning and preserving videos. We as a family of 8 live 3.5 hours away from where I go shopping, and I go shopping every 6 to 8 weeks, and then I share all the bits and pieces about what I do with the food, how I preserve it, how I, plan to use it, how the meals that we eat and all that sort of stuff over a series of videos. The variation of these videos has changed in like how often I get them out and what they look like and things like that as time has progressed, and it's still a bit of a thing in flux of figuring out the best way to share this and the best way to, hit YouTube the right way and all that as well. But this is number 4 for the grocery shop that we did at the end of April, beginning of May, and this was a shop for at least 8 weeks, so it may end up needing to be a bit longer this month because Darryl has a synod conference in Brisbane on the weekend that I was going to be coming back from groceries, and that would mean that I'd have to go a day earlier, but it plays a bit with money coming in and stuff, and I may have to leave it for the next week, which will not be great, but we will see how we go. We'll just have to have a look at supplies and all the rest of it, but it means that this shop may have to last us 9 weeks instead of 8. As I said, we'll just have to play it by ear as we go. I can't go a week earlier because we won't have the funds to do a big shop a week earlier. And yeah, I don't know yet. So I'll keep you as informed as we go anyway. So let's get into today's series of food and what we got done over the next couple of days worth of video. So I've been raiding the garden for whatever I can find over the last couple of weeks before we hit full winter, because once we start getting hard frosts then everything's going to die off. So I've been raiding it for whatever I can find when I can find stuff, and just taking advantage of what I can find and using it accordingly. So whatever I find I then turn into something else. At the moment there's an abundance of basil and some chilies and stuff here, I think you can see in the background. So we've got basil and chilies and some silver beet and things like that. Not a whole lot else. Beetroot greens, that sort of thing. So we're just using what we can find. I found some lovely looking silver beet in one of the wicking IBCs and one of the smaller garden beds as well. There had been some insect damage, but I just pulled the bits, cut the leaves off that had the insect damage and fed them to the baby chicks that were in the brooder and kept the really good looking leaves for us to eat. I diced up some potatoes really nice and small, put a bit of ghee in the cast iron pan and put the potatoes in the pan. I like to put a lid on the potatoes at this point. I don't think I show it, but I normally put a lid on the pan at this point, and that's going to help steam those potatoes, which is going to get them to cook quicker, and once they're softer then I can take the lid off and let them fry and crisp up as well. So I put a lid on them so that they're steaming while I'm getting going, and that just helps with the cooking. I then sliced up some of the mushrooms that we bought for Darryl. So I bought a box of mushrooms because Darryl had requested mushrooms this month, and I got them at a good price. I'm not a huge fan of mushrooms personally. I will eat them, but Darryl loves them just like sauteed up in a pan with a little ghee and salt, or I make jars of marinated mushrooms, things like that. I like the flavour they impart in dishes when cooked with other things, but I tend to dice them fairly small because the texture is a little bit of a problem for me, and cook them in things. They're starting to get to the point where we need to do something more with them as well, so I decided to just slice them all up in bulk and vacuum seal them. The texture of mushrooms when they're defrosted isn't great, but in the uses that I tend to use them for, they work really well, like in bolognese or slow-cooked pie fillings and that sort of thing. It doesn't really matter about the texture. All we're looking for is that flavour and the nutrition of adding it in there sort of thing. So I sliced up all that was left after cooking them some off for breakfast and then put them in vacuum seal bags for the freezer. I blistered some tomatoes while I was cooking off the mushrooms, and once they were done I added the leftover rice from dinner the night prior into the hot pan to fry off and heat up. This was just plain steamed jasmine rice that we had with the lemon chung the night before, so it's just very plain rice. I tore up the silver beet into the pan as well and added a bit of ghee to help the rice heat through without sticking and for that silver beet to wilt within the rice. I had some homemade ketchup manise from when we'd last made it. It's still in the fridge, so we drizzled that over the rice as well. It is basically 50-50 sugar and soy sauce cooked until it turns sort of syrupy. Then we served it up with the fried potatoes. Darryl had his mushrooms. We had some of the blistered tomatoes and some avocado, salt and pepper. I think the kids cooked up some bacon as well to have with theirs. There might have been a bit of leftover chicken that they claimed as well, but they basically had the same thing as well. After I had eaten, I finished vacuum sealing those bags up of mushrooms and got them in the freezer. So we got 4 bags of those, I think, which would be good to have for various things throughout the rest of the month. I decided to roast some garlic. I was coming to the end of the 5 kilo bag that I had bought, and I wanted to get it used up as I'd contacted the seller for another bag. So it was worth finishing this bag off. We love roasted garlic, especially this elephant garlic. It's so wonderfully flavorful it's got a bit of heat, but it's just a really nice tasting garlic. So I inspected the cloves, put them in foil, sprayed with a touch of oil and sprinkled with salt, and then I put it in a heavy bottom pan. The cast iron's really good for this sort of thing, and to slow cook it in the oven and barbecue. The next task for the day was canning up some butter chicken. Now I use the Skinny Mix's butter chicken recipe as a base. It's available for free on our website, but there is no approved canning method for butter chicken. So this is the one that I use. This is one that I use my knowledge and education and comfort levels to can. It's a personal comfort level preference here for this sort of thing, but I will share how I do it. Now obviously I'm going to leave the creamy factor and thickening factor out of the jars just to make the jars more along those approved lines. So I add coconut cream and cashew meal with some honey when I heat it up, and I leave those items out of the recipe base. Later on in the next couple of videos you'll see me heat it up a couple of times because it's on the shelf, then we tend to use it. So it is used in the next couple of videos, but I didn't end up opening a jar in this one. So the process on the recipe is to mix up various aspects of things separately in the Thermomix bowl, one after the other, and I follow this to a degree. The base recipe is for 700 grams of chicken. However, even if I'm making just the standalone recipe, I want more sauce than that. We use it very much as a saucy dipping style dish. We mostly eat it at lunchtime, and we don't even serve rice with it, generally speaking. We just have bowls of sauce with some chicken and flatbreads to scoop it up with. The first task is marinating the chicken. Now, I had done that the day before when I was dealing with all that chicken. I don't think I mentioned it because when I was watching back the video, I don't think I noticed that I was doing different types of marinade there. But when I was marinating the Asian style chicken and cooking off the smoked paprika, cowboy candy based chicken and stuff, I also marinated a couple of trays in the marinated listed as part of the recipe to use the next day. So about 4-ish kilos of chicken, so about 6 times the recipe, so I multiplied the marinade by that amount. It has some salt, some garam masala, ginger, garlic, ACV in it. I don't use any colouring or any chili powder in mine either though, which is on the recipe. Because I had already done that, I started with the second part of the recipe today, which is the tomato base. Now I did it in batches that fit in the Thermomix, but my goal with this is to make about 12 times the sauce base in batches. We also had a snack pause where I was asked to make popcorn. So I did a couple of pots of popcorn on the stove before I started taking up the burners to cook and to can. We used the salt and vinegar seasoning from Nyssa that everyone really loves, and she's actually sent us a couple more jars, which is fantastic. I did find my vinegar powder though, so I will be able to try to attempt to make our own version of it soon and see if we can replicate that, because everyone really likes the salt and vinegar flavouring. The tomato base is basically just tinned tomatoes, tomato paste, garlic, ginger and ACV, but you want it smooth. So all I do is fill the Thermomix in batches and blitz it till it's mostly smooth. I wasn't overly pedantic about getting it smooth though, because it will be cooked for 90 minutes in the jars. So any lumps should pretty much dissolve in that processing time regardless. I had the 800 gram tins from Costco I was using as my tomatoes, and as I said, I just figured out the ratios to do it in batches in the Thermomix, full jugs worth, and as each one was mixed and pureed, transferred it into a pot and kept on repeating until I had made the equivalent of approximately 12 times the recipe to go with the 6 times the amount of chicken. This dish is always touted as being fairly saucy anyway by Skinny Mix's aficionados, but because of the way we eat it and the fact that I'm canning it, I want the ratio of liquid to chicken to be quite high. So I double the sauce and we like it that way. After the tomato base is done, you make the onion base. This is in the recipe, this is made all in the Thermomix, but in the size dish I'm making, I find it much easier to do it in a pan on the stove. I use the Thermomix to dice up the onion really nice and small, but then I fry it off in the pan. You can see I didn't clean my bowl after the tomato base. There's a reddish tinge to my onion, which is fine. That's just the tomato base on there. a bit of ghee in the pan, and then I cook off the onion. The recipe calls for a fairly large quantity of butter with the onions. I don't use this quantity because I'm canning it, so we don't want that much fat in the sauce. I just use a couple of dollops of ghee in the pan to ensure the onion doesn't burn, and that's it. Adding a little splash of oil if the pan gets too dry while the onions are sweating. The onions will make their own liquid if you give them time and you're on low enough heat, but if you're impatient, turn the temperature up and it starts burning, a little bit of oil will help with that. I add all the dry spices to the mix as well. These are in the recipe online. I follow it fairly closely, though I will adapt it if I'm low on something. A few whole spices go in there as well, normally cinnamon sticks, except I couldn't find my jar of cinnamon sticks, so I did use ground cinnamon, some star anise and some cloves, though I have been known to grind them up as well just to make life easier, and cardamom pods go in there as well. I bruise them and throw them in. Once the spices are cooked off and aromatic with the softened onion, I add the tomato base into the onions and bring that up to a simmer. Now, I do make a judgment call here at times on the viscosity of the liquid. It is predominantly tomatoes, so realistically it can be thick. Realistically, it can be thick when it's canned. Also, when it's canned with chicken in the jar, the chicken releases some liquids which will thin out the base sauce as well. But sometimes I will add some stock in there if I think it just needs thinning out a touch. It's better to be a little too thin than too thick. After it has been simmering for a while, if a whole spice floats to the surface, then I'll grab it out. But quite a few end up in the jars. You just have to spit them out if you get one. Darryl just calls it a bit of a treasure hunt, so you know, that's life. I could put them in a bouquet garni type thing, like in the little tea bag looking things, and I did buy some reusable ones, but every time I go to make it, I forget. So you just have to pick them out when you find them. I like to very briefly cook off the chicken before putting it in the jars. If I was just making this for a meal, I would just cook the chicken off in the pot with the sauce, but it will make it more difficult to evenly disperse it between the jars for canning. So I'm going to put the chicken in and then the sauce. But if I put it in raw, it'll clump together in the bottom of the jar, whereas if I very lightly saute it, then it will hold its own shape a little better and not stick to itself in the jar. So I very lightly cooked it off. I'm not aiming for edible or fully cooked. It will still be raw in the middle, but it will have that surface tension from being cooked on the outside, which will help it to hold its own shape in the jars and to stop it from clumping together with the other pieces of chicken. Once the chicken was par cooked and the sauce had its couple of hours of simmering with the spices, I started filling the jars. I initially weighed about 250 grams of chicken into each jar, which was sort of a scant half the jar in chicken pieces, and reassessed as I filled the jars and topped up as needed to get the chicken evenly sort of dispersed. Once I had the number of jars that seemed appropriate for the quantity of chicken, I started ladling in the sauce. I debubbled the jars really well because that chicken would have plenty of pockets the sauce didn't penetrate on that first, pour in. So I made sure to mix up the chicken, get the sauce all down in the base of the jars and top up the jars as needed. You want a generous headspace on these. The 1.5 inch, which is deceptive on these jars depending on the angle. They sometimes look like they're overfilled because of the way the banding on the jars go, but the green debubbling tool has that measurement on the end, which works really well for you to double check, and these had 1.5. I ended up with 15 jars of this, which is great. As I said, we mostly use it for lunches, and it's normally served with plenty of flatbreads and regularly served with other things. We had considered how we would do things differently if we were to serve this as a whole meal, and I think I'd need a jar which was full of chicken with a little bit of sauce, and then we'd mix that jar with a jar of the sauce with a little bit of chicken, which would theoretically give us about the 700 to 800 grams of chicken in a meal, being what Skinny Mixers declares as a full meal served, though I think it only serves 4 or 6 or something in that amount, so it'd still be a fairly light quantity anyway. But we'd have to serve it over rice as well with the breads to make it a full meal, or over vegetables. Butter chicken over vegetables is really nice as well. It just have to do that sort of thing. And that's all doable, but we do love having it on the shelf for hot, easy lunches, and that's mainly what I'm making it for. I make bread for lunch a lot. Flatbreads we have, I've said before, potentially 4 or 5 times a week. We have flatbreads as our main sort of lunch to have with what we're having, whatever we're having. And we have it with meat and salad type stuff a lot. Like we have it with grilled chicken and coleslaw, or pork and coleslaw, or tomato and lettuce and ham, or whatever we happen to have available. But having this sort of a hot curry to have it with is a really nice change, and as a lunch this is 15 lunches, which we say we have one a week, is about a 2 shopping period amount, which works really well. So it means that I could can this up every 2 months and have a supply for 1 a week all that time. I could can it up in much larger quantities, of course, but I don't generally buy enough chicken to contemplate that kind of thing, because chicken's expensive. If I ever found somewhere that I could get a really good sale on chicken, then I would probably consider it. Once all the jars were full, I cleaned the rims well with a clean cloth and some white vinegar. These are Fowler's Vicola jars number 31s, and they're basically equivalent to a Ball Mason quart jar. I think they're 850ml, and quart jars are 900-ish, but have these lovely really wide mouths on them, which makes them preferable to quart jars sometimes, though Susan sent me a whole bunch of wide mouth quart jars, which is super amazing because they are not very easy to get here and they're very expensive. So I have all these wide mouth quart jars to use, and actually I've been using a lot of them for dry stuff rather than canning with, because they're just so convenient for that too. But anyway, the closures are a little different to a Ball Mason. A rubber ring is placed around the edge in an indent, and a stainless steel reusable lid is placed on top, and the seal is created between the rubber ring and the stainless lid, the ring being that single use item in this style of canning. The stainless steel lid is also held in place with clips, similar to how a ring holds a lid in place on a Ball Mason jar. I like to clean the rims with vinegar, place the rings, and also wipe the rings just in case I had anything on my hands, and then wipe the inside of the lids and place them as well. A lot of people put the rings on the jars before they fill them because they don't want to put rings on a hot jar, but I've sort of gotten to a point where I'm comfortable with it. I find it fairly easy. I have my occasional mishaps, but find it fairly easy to put a ring on a hot jar. Fowler's guidelines are for a single clip per jar. However, I have had some issues with that. I believe a lot of it is because most of my clips are secondhand. I don't polish them up, so the labeling, sizing, and that is hard to see. And I have some lids that are meant for larger jars and or glass lids, which have a higher kick up on them. Some are also very stretchy, where some are quite firm. So I will double clip jars as I deem necessary. This is a little bit controversial though. Some people will adamantly declare no matter what that you cannot double clip or the jars will not be sealed safely or correctly. So bear that in mind when you are deciding on your methods in your kitchen. With the clips on these jars, they fit quite snugly in the canner, much more snugly than a quart Ball Mason jar. But if I place them adequately so no jar impacts the next jar's clip and all jars can swivel freely, I'm okay with it. And being able to fit 8 in my Buffalo and then 7 in my Presto meant that I could can all 15 jars in one fell swoop, rather than ending up needing to run canners a second time. It's just so time consuming running 2 batches of pressure canned food, and it was getting quite late. I double checked the seals on the lids of the Presto and Buffalo before setting them in place and got them both started. Now, I don't appear to have filmed it, but obviously with the pressure canner, once the canners were spurting a steady stream of steam, I let the vent for 10 minutes and then I put the weight on. We use a 15-pound weight for our altitude, and then once the weight was slow dancing, I started the timer for 90 minutes. When pressure canning, it is important to bring that pressure up slowly, especially in a jar that has a sort of a thicker liquid and is fairly full. You want to bring the temperature up fairly slowly to get that venting steam. Once it's venting, you want to hold it at temperature, put your weight on, and then see if it'll come up, if it'll start building pressure at that, or turn it up a little bit more to get it to the pressure that you need it to go. You don't want to just go full bore straight up, because you will have siphoning in your jars. And then if it's a thicker liquid like this and it siphons, then it can impact the seal and things like that, and you can have failed jars. So you do want to try and take the temperature up at a slow sort of an incline, just to make sure that those jars are comfortable going up to that temperature and the pressure is building at a slow rate. Otherwise you can risk issues with your jars. As I said, I don't know why I didn't film any of the actual canning, probably just because it was so late. By the time I got them on the canner, it was already like dinner time. I'm kind of have so many things going on at the moment, between just general everyday life of eating and canning and making the food and then filming it and getting it sorted, plus other work that I'm trying to take on to make sure that we have enough money to be able to afford to eat and stuff, that I'm having trouble juggling it all at the moment. It's one of those points where you get to, where I think a lot of people get to when they have a secondary income or job, where they need to drop one of the jobs to focus more on that secondary one so that it builds up further, but you've got that interim period where you can't really afford to drop the other one. So anyway, lots going on. So for dinner that night, I went super simple. As I said, the canner took me past dinner time for past the time that we'd normally serve dinner and into nighttime, which is always difficult in my kitchen, especially in winter when the sun sets early. Until we get a solid roof up and get the lighting more efficient, we're just using USB lamps basically. So once I could move a canner off the burner, I got a pot of pasta boiling. I chopped up some of the cowboy candy marinated chicken from the day before, sliced it nice and small. I made a carbonara-esque style pasta, just some egg yolks whisked up with the roasted garlic and nutritional yeast, a bit of vegeta if it needed for some salt and flavour, and just put aside. Then once the pasta's cooked, we transfer the hot pasta with some of the pasta water into that egg yolk mix, agitate it, and it cooks off the egg into a lovely luscious sauce. I add the chicken and some basil from the garden, some pasta water if needed to loosen up that sauce a little bit, and we serve it with some salt and pepper. This dish is lovely if you fill it with spinach and broccoli, etc. as well, but I had limited space and time, so this is what we ended up with, slightly less nutrient dense pasta mix. So that was another couple of days in my kitchen. The canning of the butter chicken is a big task, but I find it well and truly worth it. For a start, that I could freeze it instead of canning it, definitely, except that then I'd have to have room in my freezer, and I don't. But also, it is so much simpler to get to lunchtime and go, I have no idea what I'm making for lunch. Make some flatbreads, making flatbreads, get to the end of it and go, I'll just toss a jar of butter chicken in a pan and we've got hot lunch. So having meals like that on the shelf are awesome for me, and they're worth the effort. It is effort, and it is an outlay of cost. Like, you know, that's 4.5 kilos of chicken, like 2 full trays of chicken that are used throughout this month and next month that were budget of this month, like of this month's shopping sort of thing, if it makes sense. So making them in larger quantities would be awesome, but I'd have to invest in the meat to be able to do that. We used to can just chicken on its own, like just jars of what they call ugly chicken, and we loved having that on the shelf, but I never seemed to get enough chicken that I could do that as well as have enough to eat throughout the whole month as well. Like it just doesn't work that way. And we have a similar thing with pork. I love canning just the pork. It just ends up being straight pulled pork in the jars, but we tend to use most of the pork that we buy within that month, and sometimes the canning it is beneficial, like for the butter chicken, because it gives me something that I can do quick throughout the month. But lately we just haven't really had that surplus where it's been worth the effort and the cost of the jars and the canning and things like that. But if I could get a whole bunch of stuff cheap in bulk, like I bought the 5 porks the grocery before last, cheap, they were $8 off or whatever, and we turned them into sausages for the freezer. That was amazing. So something like that, I could have turned all them into canned pork instead of sausages, but we chose sausages, and we're coming up to the point where we're nearly finished all those sausages. Again, we get it in bulk like that, like the butter chicken and everything else, it really only lasts 2 shopping periods worth. So we made all those sausages, and it's still probably only sort of, it's 4 months worth of food, which is a lot. Like when you think about it, it's 4 months worth of food, but it's only 2 shopping periods for me. And sometimes that feels huge. Like, you know, if I have to go to that, like that was a day and a half, 2 days worth of effort to make all those sausages. And even though it's, say, 4 months in between, it doesn't feel that far in between because I'm doing all this food prep all the time. I don't know if that makes sense, but it makes sense to me. So anyway, that was the next couple of days of food, and I will see you guys again on the next video. I am looking at trying to do a live. Everyone keeps on asking me to do a live, so I am looking at trying to do a live maybe on Sunday when Daryl's at church would make it easier. I'd have less kids to juggle while I'm doing it. I don't know, I might have to put a poll up in the community post and see what time suits people and try and figure that out. But I find the idea of a live a little bit daunting, but there is a lot of questions that people have that I don't have time to answer, and I'm a bit behind on my comments at the moment. Like I spent so much time, like 2 years or whatever, where I answered every single comment, and I just can't keep up anymore. So that's a bit sad, but I try and go back, and I'm sure sometimes people sit there and get a reply to a comment like weeks later and go, oh, I even forgot I put that there, but that's just the way it is. So anyway, I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching, and have a good week.